This episode of Brains on Games is about tic-tac-toe and multiplication. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald, and this episode we're going to talk about a math game that was sent to me not too long ago by a company with the appropriate name of Joyful Mathematics. It is a game called Multi. Now, this is a multiplication game that can be played by 2 players. It works for kids age 7 and up, so if the 7-year-olds are working on learning their multiplication, this is one way to do it, and you can play a game in about 30 minutes to an hour. Let's take a deeper look at Multi. This is a game with a box that does close, so you should be able to see here on the camera that everything is flat. You can hear some stuff rumbling around maybe inside the box. When I pop the box open, you've got the big game board with multiplication tables on it. You've got the instructions, which are very short. There's not very much to learn here. This is an easily accessible game, which we'll talk about. You've got a little board called the factor board. And this is neat. When you see the big board all laid out, the numbers on here are color-coded by the times tables. And then you've got the X's and O's, all the pieces here inside. Now, I did add some baggies to keep things organized a little bit. These didn't come with the game. One of those big die boxes you can see on the shelf behind me is full of baggies that I've sort of claimed from other games when I didn't need all of the bags that came inside the boxes. So baggies are definitely helpful when you're organizing your board game components. Multi is a game that's light in terms of its complexity. Really what you're doing here is playing tic-tac-toe on 10 different boards. You can see there are 9 grids on here, but I'll tell you what the 10th one is in a moment. So it is pretty light. We used to play tic-tac-toe with the boys when we were waiting for food at a restaurant, and sometimes we would play in a big grid just like this. We'd play multiple games and see who could win. But so it's light, and because it is a game that follows the rules of tic-tac-toe, it is really easy for kids to pick up. What you're doing here on this board is you're playing 9 games of tic-tac-toe with the goal of winning 3 boards in a row. So the 10th board is kind of the overall meta board, if you want to call it that. So if O, for example, wins this grid here, which has the 5s times tables inside of it, they would get a great big O on that one. And if X wins the 9 times, or I won't say the 9 times tables, is way down at the bottom. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. Say the 4 times table, then the X would go here. So you're trying to win this overall game of tic-tac-toe, and you do that by winning each of these grids. You're playing them all at the same time. The way you do that, the way you play your X's and O's to the board is using this factor board right here. I'll put it in the middle on the camera. So the first player is going to choose one of these numbers. Say I chose the number 4, and then I'm going to put an X on each of the number 4s that appears anywhere in the grid. So of course there's one here for the 1s time table. There's a 4 in the 2s. You're not going to find one in the 3 times table, but there's the 4 times table right there. So you're going to X any of the times that that number appears. Then the next player, the O player, is going to place a second circle on the factor board, and that is the number that you're going to multiply. So I'm not going to be putting O's on the number 6s, but 4 times 6 is 24. So I'm going to be putting my O's on all of the 24s on the board. So there should be one here with the 4 times table, and of course with the 6 times table, 8 times 3. So you're going to get a couple more here. One there and one down here at number 8. Let me find it. There it is. Okay. So what you're doing is playing on multiple boards, and you're trying to win each of them so that you can get the meta game won by winning 3 boards in a row, as if you were playing tic-tac-toe. Now that we've got both of these little circles on the factor board, well, the next player, X, will take their turn, and they're going to just move one of them. So now I've got 4 and 6, but I can't move both of them. So maybe I'm going to do 4 times 9 and put X's on all the 36s, or 4 times 3 and get all the 12s. There are lots of 12s on the board that we could choose from. Maybe I want 4 times 5, so I can start working on the 5 times table here in the middle. So you're really thinking about the numbers, and you're doing this multiplication. Typically, it's going to be mental multiplication, but you might be able to see that there are little squares in here that show the total. So you've got the 8 up here, and you can see the 8 is two groups of 4. So it's an interesting way of visualizing the multiplication tables, almost like those little manipulatives or squares that you might be working with if you're doing your math. But the board is also color coded according to the factor board. So if I've got a 1, I know I'm going to find a number that's up here in the red squares. The 9 times table is purple. It actually goes, and I only noticed this after a few games. It's the colors of the rainbow, right? And it goes in order: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. So, so you've got all of the colors here of the rainbow, and you know that this light purple is the 9 times table down here at the bottom. So you can at least find one of the products is going to be in, well, two of the products, right? One will be in the 1s and one will be down here in the 9s, but there are others that are going to be there as well, because 1 times 9 is 9, 3 times 3 is also 9, so you've got to find that in the 3 times table. So you're working with these products and you're working on the board at the same time and thinking about, how am I going to head off my opponent at the pass? We found as we were playing through the game, a few things happen. One, once we had a few boards that were filled up, there are some numbers that are now out of play. So I'm not going to necessarily get any benefit from choosing a 14 if all the 14s have already been chosen. You actually have to choose a product that hasn't been picked yet, or else you're stuck. So the other thing that happened was that we were sort of debating between choosing a number that was going to be helpful on one of the boards, say that I was working on. Maybe if I was working on the 5 times table, I'd be wanting a product with 5. But also, you're trying to block the other player. Maybe I was physically acting to put an X that would block them from getting their 3 O's in a row, or maybe I was working to choose one of the numbers here on the factor board that would stop them from being able to choose the number that they wanted on their next turn. So if they were working on something on the 3 times table, that was, say, they wanted their 15, I'm not going to want to choose a 5 or a 3, because that's going to give them a chance. If I choose 12 now, that's going to give them a chance on their turn to get that 15 that they want. So I might instead try 4 times 9, so that there's nothing in that 3 times table that they're going to be able to get. Well, they might be able to get a 9, but that doesn't help them with their 15. They don't have the right factors in order to be able to do it, because they can only use one of those. Now, if you do get stuck, if you can't make a legal move, if all of your options are blocked, then the next player gets to choose 2 new numbers. So then they really have all of the options open to them and they can pick whatever they want. Of course, it is a game, well, multiple games of tic-tac-toe going on at the same time. So sometimes these boards are going to end in a tie. Players are going to be able to block one another and nobody's going to be able to win that space. If that happens, then that space becomes a wild board. So instead of just an X, say, in the 1s timetable, there would be both an X and an O, and it counts as both for either player. So now either player could get, if I've got an O down here, the O player is going to want to win this one. That'll allow them to win the game. Like I said, super simple mechanisms in play here. You're doing some area control. You're trying to take over these boards on the tic-tac-toe grid here. And it's a lot of pattern recognition, right? Well, multiplication is all about patterns. So it is a game where your ability to notice those patterns and to remember them is really going to help you figure out what your best play is as quickly as possible. Because players are making an effort to get those 3 X's in a row or 3 O's in a row, and they're thinking about that meta game, and they have to plan ahead in order to win as many of these spaces as possible, it is another one of those spatial games with spatial reasoning and spatial planning. And of course, like I said earlier, there are those pattern recognition skills. There are mental math calculations that you're doing in this game as well, right? Because it is multiplication, generally you're going to be doing that math mentally. Maybe you'll be counting through the multiplication sequences on your fingers, or you'll be looking for the numbers on the board. So of course it's a game that allows kids to practice, I think, in a way that's way better than just using flashcards and memorizing those numbers, because you're seeing how those numbers interact with one another. when you've got that factor board and you've got the 4 times 3 is 12, you're going to be trying to find all the other 12s on the board and seeing what times tables those fit into as well. So 6 times 2 and 2 times 6 and 3 times 4 and 4 times 3. So 12 is going to show up quite a few times on the board. 16 is another one. So it's an interesting way of practicing those skills, but also seeing sort of the overall patterns and the way those numbers relate to one another. Way more interesting than just doing flashcards, I think. Final thoughts about Multi. Well, like I said earlier, it is a super accessible game because really you're just playing tic-tac-toe rules. So most kids, even very young kids, understand the rules of tic-tac-toe. As you get older, you learn some tricks and some patterns that will allow you to be better at that game, but younger kids will understand the rules for this one. So super accessible, easy to learn, quick to teach. It's a game where it's a good looking board and the color coding is also helpful. So I think it's a clever design in that way that you've got the different colors that match up with the colors on the factor board just to make kids' lives easier. It's great for the multiplication tables, and I think it's great for seeing those relationships. So anyone who's learning or practicing multiplication could benefit from playing a game like this. And it's interesting that this game came to me recently, but not too long ago, I had some kids who are asking me, they've been using calculators in where I live. They've used calculators in high school all the way from grade 7 to grade 12. So they haven't really done a lot of multiplication by hand in their head even since maybe elementary school. And now here they are in university and they have some tests that they have to write where they're not allowed to have a calculator with them. So they had to relearn those old skills and refamiliarize themselves with the times table. So that's another reason why I think pulling a game like this out might be helpful. Of course, they're going to practice and, you say the song to yourself. 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 4 is 16, all of those things. But a game like this is something that might help those numbers to sink in and the patterns to sink in a bit of a different way. Maybe once they've learned the basics, if they've memorized those times tables once again, they can sit down and consolidate that information by playing a game or two of Multi as well. And that, in a nutshell, is Multi. It is a quick game that's all about practicing the multiplication tables from 1 times table to the 9 times table. And I have to thank once again the folks over at Joyful Mathematics for sending this game my way. If you have any questions or comments about Multi, you can leave them in the comment section below the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website where future episodes will go, and the previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.